Hello and welcome to the CEO Blindspots show, where leaders lead leaders. I'm your host, Birgit Kamps, and today's guest is Kaz Bycko, who is the CEO of both RedDirtMining and Bubblfm, which we'll talk about more during the show. But I also want to point out that Kaz is the co-founder of the Oklahoma Bitcoin Association and is one of the first to teach at Oklahoma University something about Bitcoin. Welcome to the show, Kaz.
Hi, Birgit. How you doing? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm so glad we met at the Bitcoin conference because I learned so much from you already there, not only about Bitcoin, but then as a podcaster myself, I learned that I had a blind spot around podcasts, which is really what Bubble FM is about. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to start a second company?
Yeah, so we're working on a company called Bubblfm. We just go by Bubble. Bubblfm is the domain, and we're all podcast junkies. I was noticing that there was a shifting media landscape, and people were moving away from traditional institutions in the written form, and they're having more of a spoken word conversation on podcasts. And so what I noticed that was lacking was a way to actually discover new content. And me as a user was kind of trapped in a routine of the same shows. And it was hard to find new content that I may have been interested in. And there was a limiting factor on the amount of time I could actually spend listening to new shows. And so there's a revolution kind of happening in podcasting called Podcasting 2.0. And a big aspect of that is being able to find clips and share those clips. And I thought, well, there needs to be more of a discovery layer built around sharing these highlight moments so people can actually find, well, I'm interested in this short few second, maybe few minute clip of a show, and they may be talking about something that's not how the episode may be titled. And so your show is very focused on CEOs and leadership, but maybe there's a few moments that we talk about, I don't know, Oklahoma City Thunder basketball. And somebody actually might come to your show because they're interested in Thunder basketball. And it's like, well, that was just a small part of the episode. And in those moments where you kind of hear more about the person and the vulnerability side, it's actually what attracts people. So we wanted to build a platform around being able to find these moments.
Mm. Well, you said something very important, right? For leaders, time is of the essence. And I know leaders sometimes have leadership issues and they wish they could just search for what have other leaders done when I've struggled with whatever it is. So I'm really happy you're providing that. And my daughter already tested your platform and I told her Bubble. So I want to point out to the listeners, it's Bubble without the E at the end. So bubble.fm. But anyway, tell me a little bit about yourself as a leader. I noticed the the same three, let's see, both RedDirtMining, Bubble, and it looks like the Oklahoma Bitcoin Association. You did all of those with the same partner. I think his name was Storm Rund.
Yes.
And so I hear it's important as a leader to always have a good partner or good people you work with, but I haven't heard very often where the same partner carries throughout multiple companies. So tell me a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, I think you hit on a really interesting aspect that I wasn't prepared for, but Storm has been one of my best friends for a long time. So we grew up together, went to high school together. We went to different universities, and then I went into the workforce and he went to law school. And we had always kept up, and actually, Bitcoin is where we started to kind of come back together. I was very early in Bitcoin, and I was sending him stuff. I was like, dude, you've got to pay attention to this. And I was like, you're the smartest person I know, and you're not into Bitcoin yet. And he fought me for years. And then eventually in law school, it clicked for him. And I was like, hey, we should go back to Oklahoma. I was living in Texas. He was in New York for law school. And I was like, we should start a Bitcoin mining company. We're sitting in the part of the United States that we have abundant power, cheap real estate, and it's going to be a hub for Bitcoin mining. And I was like, I don't know anything about it, and he doesn't either, but we'll figure it out. And so it started there. I mean, I come from more of a technical side, and he does not.
Mhm.
And we work together really well. He's I trust him and he trusts me. And we've grown our skill set together. And I'm pretty confident that no matter what the business is in the future, that we'll be able to figure it out together. And so I think trusting your team and having people that have a little bit of a different worldview than you can really provide that leadership and that insight for growing a company. And so now we've been able to scale it to a few different companies at this point. And we also, like you mentioned, the Oklahoma Bitcoin Association, which is a 501c6. We're an industry association for Bitcoin companies, mainly miners. And we work with representatives at the state level to actually pass policy into law for the industry.
Wow. So you mentioned the importance of, you trust him. I think that is indeed very important. And then also unique skill sets. You complement each other. You've got, I cannot imagine a more powerful combination, right? Technology and legal.
Yeah.
That's great. So I also read that your overarching big goal is to make Oklahoma a Bitcoin country, like the innovation hub and all that. So it sounds like you guys are well on your way to getting that done.
Yeah, that was I was taking a little bit of a meme there from El Salvador because they were the first country to pass Bitcoin as legal tender, and they called themselves Bitcoin country. And I was like, well, let's take a little play on that. Let's make Oklahoma Bitcoin country. And there was a big initiative at the time, like kind of I think it was called like Silicon Prairie, where they were trying in the Midwest to bring in tech companies. And in some ways it's worked, but it hasn't been, phenomenal. There's still a concentration on the west side. And so I was like, well, Bitcoin mining is kind of a little Goldilocks zone for this because you can't do it in a major city or in a state with massively high power rates. And so the Midwest is really, and the South is a region that could thrive with Bitcoin mining because of the rural aspect of it.
Interesting. I keep learning from you. And so you're really kind of like you did with Storm, you are helping us who don't understand very much the details of Bitcoin and mining. You explain it very well. And not only that, but I am curious. I don't know a lot of universities who currently have teachers teaching Bitcoin. So how did you get that done?
Yeah, and I don't come from an academic background either. And so whenever I was at the university, and this was in maybe 2016, I had a professor and I was taking a cybersecurity class, and one of the topics was Bitcoin. And I was like, as soon as I saw it, I was like, we're presenting over Bitcoin, guys. And that was one of my first times to speak publicly and explain what Bitcoin was. And fast forward, we moved back to Oklahoma. We have a Bitcoin mining company. We start the Bitcoin Association. I reached back out to that professor and I was like, hey, this is what we're doing at the state level. I'd love to come just give a talk and explain Bitcoin. And the student engagement was pretty insane. They like stayed after for almost an hour. They were sending Bitcoin around on wallets. And she was like, I've never seen students eat up a conversation like this much. And so we ended up going back a few times and I was like, hey, I think there's an area for like a full length semester course on this. And she's like, I'd love that, but we don't have anybody to teach it. Can you teach it? I was like, well, I've never done that before, but absolutely. So I spent a semester pretty much building a class because there's not even like a book for academics about teaching Bitcoin. There's a few different professors and they mainly come from an academic background. So they're like an economics professor at USC, and then they found Bitcoin and they're like, well, I'm going to teach a class on Bitcoin and economics. And so I had to build an entire course of like, okay, how do you teach this? And then what angle do you start with? Because I'm sure there's a lot of different aspects to Bitcoin it's not just technical. It's not just the money side. There's a philosophical side and there's a lot of history. And so if you don't know all of these different lenses and how they fit together, you kind of have just one way of viewing Bitcoin. And I was like, I want to give them more than just that. So this is a 4,000 level course in the business college, and most of them are studying MIS, which is like IT for business.
Mhm.
And so I was like, there needs to be a technical side, but also the money side. And so I was like, how do you do that? So I built a class that basically it follows through Bitcoin history chronologically, and it uses an event in Bitcoin history each week as like a jumping off point to explain the technical side, maybe the economic side, the philosophical side, or just the cultural side, because that is a huge aspect that I think people miss is Bitcoin is cultural money in the same way. It came from a cypherpunk ethos. And so without that understanding of what that even means and why these kind of hackers were working on it, it gives you kind of a lack of understanding.
Huh. Well, obviously you did that well enough because you're now doing the second version of it, right? You're teaching another course again.
Yes. So the feedback was great. So that was last fall. I took the spring off, but I'm going to start doing it every semester now. So
Okay. Well, then I hope you hire a good team or have a good team so you can be freed up to do that. So why don't we talk about your leadership experience? I know early in your career you started with Accenture, which is a very well-known company, and there already you led the Bitcoin and digital assets engagement for other huge companies. I saw Intel, Google, IBM, and then as you know, I'm originally from the Netherlands, and I saw even the Dutch government you did some work for. So was that where you started learning how to be a leader, or how did you develop yourself as a leader?
I'd say I started there, but it's always difficult at a big company like that to truly stand out as a leader, especially being younger. So, I mean, I was working on a very cutting edge aspect of the technology side, and I came in with an angle that even some of the older people in the firm didn't really understand that side of the technology. So it gave me a little bit of a platform in a smaller area of the company to stand out. And so I got some really interesting opportunities early on in my career to work with huge companies and actually lead teams. And so from a technology architecture perspective, like I was leading development teams right out of the chute. And so that's where it started and it's changed. I ended up leaving Accenture. I wanted to get in more of a startup environment. I went to Swan Bitcoin. I saw you had Corey on here. I think it may have been the last episode. I
My
don't,
last episode, yes.
yeah.
And I saw that you joined there when there was only 10 employees, and you helped grow it to over 150 employees. So
Yeah,
is that the School
the
of Hard
growth was
Knocks, or
insane.
how did you learn to do that?
The growth was insane at Swan. Yeah, I was there for almost 3 years. Great team, and it's just progressively gotten more and more. I wanted more risk. I wanted more ownership. I wanted to be more entrepreneurial, and I think that's where my leadership skills started to develop. Is like, okay, I have to make this thing work to pay my bills. And so if I'm leading this company, at a certain point, you just put your back up against the wall and it's like, well, you have to be a leader because I've taken on enough risk at this point.
Yes. So did you have a mentor? Did you read books? Did you just trial and error it? How did you figure that out?
Yeah, I have a few mentors. One of them, his name is Max Gagliardi. He's here in Oklahoma City. He's been in the media space, real estate, oil and gas. He's an entrepreneur in multiple different industries at this point. And we found each other through Bitcoin. And so whenever I left Swan and I went fully out on my own, I really started to lean on him. And I was like, here's some things that I'm struggling with. How did you overcome something similar? I actually talked to him like 2 weeks ago and asked him again. So I think finding mentors that, I mean, it's always good if they're from a different industry, but if they have a way to connect with you that you are working a little bit maybe in the same industry, you can share experiences. And so I still learn a lot from him. I love to read, but I don't think that you learn as much from books as you do from people.
Yes, and not only that, but now you can, instead of read, listen, right, via Bubble
Yeah.
on leadership. But yes, the human connection and experience certainly has made a big difference in my life too with mentors. So was there an aha moment or a time where you're like, man, I have a blind spot as a leader because something happened that you realize needed to be adjusted?
Yeah. So We're very technical as a team, and what we're building is very on the cutting edge of technology. And I would say my biggest leadership blind spot, I'm sorry about the dog in the background. My biggest leadership blind spot was underestimating how much of the marketing and distribution is a priority. And so we were like so focused on the technical side and the product side of things that we underestimated the you actually have to do a lot of work in distributing this out there and explaining it to people. And I was like, well, I come from like I teach a class, I can obviously explain things, and we're building a podcasting platform. So I was like, well, maybe the biggest way to change the distribution and explain it to people is to just go on more podcasts and talk to people. So we spent like 9 months building this company, and we were coding every single day. And it's like, well, maybe maybe we should put more of a priority on just going and speaking to people. And it's not always as like how many GitHub commits can you get in a day that's showing productivity. It's like just going on a conversation for an hour or two can actually do a lot more for your growth than building the best product in the world. Because if you have the best product in the world and nobody's using it,
Yeah.
there's no point.
And what was the moment that you realized that? Did someone tell you, hey, we should do that? Were you just reflecting? What happened?
I was just reflecting on how software development has changed. And so like our product is built heavily with AI in the back end, but we also as a team use AI for development and with personal workflows. And so we can get a lot done in a short amount of time comparative to how it used to be done. And I was like, man, we're spending all this time building, and there needs to be more of a priority put on getting it out there, talking about it, doing the marketing and distribution side of the company. And so that's where I think things have changed a lot. Is it's like 10 times easier to build software than it used to be, but it's a lot harder to put your product out in the world and get users to understand it and see it.
Mm. So it sounds like now instead of having a team of 150, you can have a team of 5. I'm exaggerating, make a point, but how much would you say your expertise in knowing how to use AI tools has helped you have a smaller team versus a larger team?
Dramatically. I mean, I think it's completely changed how startups are formed now. So they used to have to take on a lot of capital. Maybe you had the founders of the company were really good at raising money, but they weren't technical. And a great example of this is my partner Storm. Like he had no software development skills at all until we started working on this company in July of last year. And I was like, I came from a technology architecture background. So I was looking at it and I was like, well, this has changed a lot because with these tools, if you're articulate and you could speak English and you have just a little bit of architecture skills, which that's where I had to lead a lot and show them, hey, this is how things kind of fit together, but you don't need to write every line of code by hand anymore. And so if you can speak English into a computer and you're very articulate with how you're prompting the AI, you can build software probably 10 times quicker than you used to. And so you don't need to take on as much capital raise to even have a product anymore. You can bootstrap things with a much smaller team, and you don't need to have a massive dev shop or anything like that anymore. You can have AI agents that you work with that can do more than a human can.
Wow, that will certainly help a lot of leaders because it's very challenging these days to build teams that work well together and stay together because there's so much turnover. So as it comes to leading people specifically, any struggles you had there and any tips you have on how to lead teams?
Yeah. So with another one of my partners, like we had a little bit of a challenge in the beginning. And I'd say you have to understand that everybody on your team was once a 3-year-old. I heard this analogy the other day and I really loved it. It's a good way to look at history, and people have different views on history. But if you remember, they were all people and they were at one point a 3-year-old. It gives you a little bit more of a compassionate and empathetic view. And so I'm a hard leader. I'm hard to work with sometimes. I'm very like, we need to get this done. And it was a little bit of a challenge in the beginning because it was like, hey, we're not moving quick enough. Why are you not moving quick enough?
Mhm.
And so now taking a step back and being like, okay, maybe somebody has something going on in their life this week or whatever it is, and just realizing it's not always about how productive it is. You're still working with a team, and if there's a challenge that goes on for an extremely long time, that's maybe different. But you have to understand that you have to trust your team.
Mm. And Kaz, what was the moment that you realized you were a hard leader and made the adjustment?
um so it was actually a few years ago whenever we had first started RedDirtMining, and one of my partners came to me and said, hey, you need to take a step back sometimes. You're really like, you're a go-getter, and we love that about you. Like, my team calls me Bulldog because I'm Bulldog. And
Yeah.
so I think it was just listening to my team, and they were like, hey, we love this about you, but it's also sometimes not the easiest to work with. So yeah, there's a little bit of a vulnerability there.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And it's great that, number one, your partner told you and that your team felt comfortable talking to you about that as well.
Yeah.
And obviously you responded, or at least you're now aware. So, okay. Well, I also saw that you do Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. So, how much does that help you with leadership?
Massively. And so I do that 3 to 4 times a week, early in the morning. And if anybody's listening that does jujitsu, they'll totally understand this. If you're not, if you haven't, then you might not. But it is extremely hard. You know, there's challenges in leading a business, leading a team, starting a new company, but fighting a 250-pound man at 8 in the morning is, I would say, a little bit harder in a different way.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of, bulldog energy. And so I go there and I come out and I'm just like, okay, that was the hardest thing I'm going to do today by far.
Mhm.
Um, Leading the team, that's easy now. Working 10, 12 hours a day, that's much easier after you woke up and fight.
Yes, I can see that. Okay, so do the hard thing first thing in the morning, and then the rest is doable.
Exactly.
Okay, so whole Bitcoin blind spot that a lot of business leaders have. What can you share about, what they should be aware of, or what should they learn about if they have never even, if they're like your partner was at first,
Right.
smart, but they don't really get it or understand it or even think it's viable.
So I'd say you have to be open-minded and you have to challenge your preconceived views. And it's changing a little bit now. It seems like the media is starting to become a bit more receptive to Bitcoin. But for the past 10, 15 years, if you just read like a news article about Bitcoin, it was not necessarily positive.
Yeah.
And so it's very easy to just be like, oh, that's nothing, not worth my time. But it's a lot harder to say, okay, maybe there is something revolutionary here and it's deserving of my time and attention. Bitcoin also takes a considerable amount of time to understand. It's not something you can spend 2 hours and be like, oh, I get it now. Corey talks a little bit about this. Other people in the Bitcoin space, they're like, you have to do about 100 hours worth of truly dedicated studying for you to have that, oh, this is really big. And this can fundamentally change how I operate my business, how I choose to raise capital or not raise capital. And I think business leaders need to be more open to these revolutionary technologies and give them the time that they deserve so that they can change how they operate their business. And I think having Bitcoin as a part of your treasury strategy as a company can dramatically change things as we're continuing to devalue the dollar. And so I think holding Bitcoin for a long period of time, not trying to trade it, not trying to do all the other junk, but just sitting there and saying, we're going to hold Bitcoin because we need to have a reserve in the future because cash flows are going to continue to go down in US dollar terms. And holding and just sitting on dollars, like Michael Saylor makes that analogy, it's like sitting on a melting ice cube.
Hmm. Great analogy. Certainly feels that way right now. Plus, those 100 hours, so to speak, they can now go to Bubble.fm and type in Bitcoin and,
Yeah,
and learn from lots of different podcasts, right?
exactly.
So, okay. Well, as we go forward, there's a lot of leaders right now that are struggling and having to pivot their business, having to figure out, what used to work doesn't work. So, have you ever had to pivot? And do you have any tips on how to make it through crisis?
Yeah, I think in startups, you have to be very ready to pivot. You sometimes come in with an idea, and that idea may be great, but if you're not listening to what the market wants, you know, it's never going to really take off. The first time we really pivoted was with RedDirtMining. And so we built that as an operations company. So we go out, we build the mines for investors, and we handle that a little bit differently than other companies. Like there's a lot of companies that raise a lot of money or they try to go public and they think that's the way to scale. And I noticed that they have a huge administrative burden just going public. And so I was like, well, we're going to be private. And we need to teach our investors that it's not about the marginal profitability of what the month cash flows look like in USD terms. It's about what are they getting the Bitcoin at from a cost perspective to mine it? And then can they find a way to hold that over the long term? And so we initially went out, we found some oil and gas investors, and we built this operation. That's going great, but it's a huge amount of time. And we were like, there has to be a way that we can still deploy this strategy, but not be on the operations side. And so after about 2 years of running that company, that operation works great, but we can't continue to just hire more people and keep the same lean strategy that makes the strategy work. And so we found a couple partners. One is an oil and gas operator and the other is an operations team. And we pivoted RedDirtMining to become more of like brokering deals. And so now we don't actually do any of the manual labor, but we're way more profitable than we were.
So, what was that moment when you realized a pivot was needed?
Sweating in a 115-degree Bitcoin mine out in the middle of nowhere.
Okay, yes, that'll do it. Sometimes we're forced to reflect, right?
Right.
Okay, and then I also noticed that you had a podcast at one point. What was it called? Down the Rabbit Hole. And then
Hmm.
now you're starting another one, or you've had another one, the White Mirror Show.
Yes.
So I guess you do work 12 plus hours a day because you have all these plates spinning that somehow you manage.
Yeah, so I started down the rabbit hole, I think it may have been in 2020. I had left Accenture at this point, and I was looking for a way to penetrate into the actual Bitcoin space. And I wanted to start a company, didn't know what company to start or even how to start a company at that point. And I was like, well, I'm really educated on Bitcoin. I'm confident if I can just start a podcast and have good guests on, I can find a way to go work at a company or find something to start after. And so I started that podcast and just had a good time, like networking, meeting a lot of people, had really big guests on from the Bitcoin space. And that's actually how Corey found me. And so then I went to work at Swan after that from just having deep conversations with people about Bitcoin. I Podcasting is a lot of work and you have to continually be putting out content. And so once we started to work on startups, I put it on the back burner for quite a while. And then we're building a podcast company. And so I'm like, well, we probably should spend time building a podcast. And the White Mirror Show is really the inverse of the Black Mirror. Everybody's familiar with Netflix, Black Mirror, and dystopian view of technology. And I was like, well, it's really just a lens that you can view the world through. And Bitcoin in my eyes, is like a white mirror technology. It's hope for a better future. It's using technology in a way that is empowering of humans versus this like AI overlord sort of dystopian view. And I was like, I view AI the same way. A lot of people are scared of it. And I'm like, no, this is actually a great way to leverage your time and get more done so you can spend more time with your family and doing the things that you love.
Yeah, we're
So,
starting another company and another company
yeah.
like you do. But okay, then I look forward to listening to your podcast as well. And the last question I have is what originally connected you to Bitcoin? How did you discover it? What interested you originally?
Yeah, so I was wanting to go into cybersecurity. So I was deep researching ethical hacking and what it looked like to work in the cybersecurity industry. This was all in college. And when I was down that rabbit hole, I found Bitcoin. And I had a double major, and so I was also studying economics, and I was like, huh, this is really interesting because it satisfies like two interests for me that before Bitcoin weren't really connected. Like economics and technology are kind of different, completely different silos. But Bitcoin, it bridges them both. And so I was like, wow, this is really interesting. I initially approached it from a technical understanding point because I couldn't understand it. Like I remember I was reading about it and I was just like, I had to keep reading the same sentence over and over again. And I was like, this still doesn't make sense to me. Like, I don't even know what these words mean. And so it was like a challenge for me. I was like, this seems revolutionary, but I can't explain it to anybody because I can't even read this sentence and know what it means. So I had to just continue to challenge myself to understand it. Now we're at the point where I'm teaching a class on it, which seems weird to say, but yeah, that was really where it started.
Well, I really appreciate you in the short amount of time kind of giving us your journey through not just Bitcoin, but entrepreneurship. And you're clearly passionate about what you do. So I look forward to listening to you on Bubble FM. And people, if they want to check that out, they can do that as well. I would say RedDirtMining.io as well, but that's now pivoted to a different type of company. But is there anything else you would like to say before we wrap up the show?
No, just thank you so much for having me on. I really enjoyed it, Birgit.
Yeah, my pleasure. And I appreciate you being willing to come on and continuing to develop the Bitcoin community. And I clearly got to see at the conference how much you're helping so many people and beyond the economics, right? Really are helping people, educating people, and making Oklahoma the Bitcoin country. So thank you again so very much.
Thank you.